share my presentation like this. So. It doesn't really move. Okay, so I'll start. So the title is, as you said, Kiki, Interwoven Inclusive Teaching, which I call IIT, from a student perspective and with a continental didactic approach. And this image is the front page of my dissertation, and it's an illustration of my results, I could say. So, oh, now there's a sound. Could you put off your mic, please? Thank you. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so a short background and conditions. So this is obviously my thesis that I just defended. And the aim was to do, on a phenomenological basis, describe and contribute with an understanding of inclusion from the perspective of high school students, and furthermore to analyze how this work can be understood from a continental didactic perspective. And this continental didactic perspective I will explain, because I know that didactics in the international context is a concept that is a bit, can be understood in different ways. But I was interested in how the phenomena of inclusive education is constituted from the student's perspective, how it manifests itself in teachers' work according to students, and what it contributes to. And this presentation will focus on this question number 2. Yeah, and now I see that both Mel and Kiki are here, as we know, and so I've been very inspired by your descriptions of inclusive education and also of student voice. And this is how I found Kiki. So one basis of my study is what Kiki says, that listening to children's voices is a manifestation of being inclusive, and also that students' experience can contribute to a critical edge, and in this way add distinctive perspectives for developing changes in learning and teaching that go well beyond traditional views of effective practice. And I must say, I've been working with these questions for, as you said, for many years now, and I constantly just realized that I should have asked this question before, because the students' perspective have given me very new ideas on what inclusive teaching can be. Very shortly on methodology. So I have a phenomenological approach. I can talk about that a lot, but I will not. But I've been using a lot of Merleau-Ponty in my analysis. I've been doing thematic and dynamic design in my empirical work. I've been using art-based research and creative methods in the field work with the students, and I have constantly applied a critical perspective on power and authority based on Sara Ahmed's theories in both my practice and my theoretical analysis. Short about the field work, it's material from 6 very diverse Swedish upper secondary schools with students 16 to 18. And the material is reflections on students' current and past school experiences. So they talked both about teachers that they have now and that they had before. And the main field work was I did digital surveys with open-ended responses, and I did that in classrooms. So I was out in many different classrooms and asking students to answer with their computers or their phones, and I had 578 students answering. And then they were given the opportunity to also participate in interviews, and so I had 6 individual interviews, and I had 4 group interviews with 19 students. And then I also did in-depth field work. So I did creative workshops with 2 classes where they did some drawings, they did collages, photo elicitation. I did a role play with 1 group and also did mind mapping. And that was about 30 students. So approximately material from 630 students. So it's quite a huge material, but they are saying quite the same things over and over again, I would say. I will not go into this, but my analysis has been phenomenological, which is, to say simply, you brew a bouillon. You know, you try to over and over again find the concentrate of what is really in the material. So it's not a thematic analysis, but it's my finding the things that are behind the material, like the things that are constant behind the material. So try to clear the image of the phenomena, which is then inclusive teaching. Then coming to the theoretical underpinnings, and I will focus here on continental didactics, because I know that that's a thing that's maybe not so clear, but I will also describe something about how I see inclusion. So I share the broad view of inclusion that UML and others have been defining. The broad view of inclusion, both who is included, namely all discriminated groups, but also why inclusion is needed, and where you describe it for presence, participation, and achievement. So I have a broad view on who is included and why inclusion is needed. And then another theoretical baseline is the phenomenological, ontological, and epistemological approach. And as I said, I won't go into that because it's an entire other presentation. But it holds that the world is lived and it appears to humans through their direct experiences in actual situations, and that they can be understood through human experience. So the world can only be understood through the experience of people's experience of the world. That could be said. I'm also very inspired by Max van Manen here in this ideas. And then I am also using didactics. So inclusive education is not usually connected to didactics, but I am trying to understand it in line with the continental tradition of Bildung, which is mainly focused in the German theoretical sphere. And then inclusive teaching is thus, in my thesis, understood as a fundamentally didactic endeavor. And I am very much in line with what Korsgaard and Mortensen write in this article that I really recommend. They've been writing this article in the International Journal of Inclusive Education, and the title is Towards a Shift in Perspective for Inclusive Education Research, a Continental Approach. And then they say that the motivation is to entice inclusive education researchers to begin to ask educational questions of inclusion, as opposed to inclusive questions of education. And for me, this is really, really fundamental, because I think as a pedagogue and as a person being within pedagogy and didactics, I think that we need a didactic and pedagogical language for the everyday teaching that teachers do that can contribute to inclusion. And when I say teaching, I am understanding teaching as very shortly, it's the teacher's purpose-driven and proactive work throughout the school day with all students. And I understand teaching as something taking place in classrooms as well in corridors and schoolyards. So I think, like, I have problems with people talking about teaching and the social as it's some different things, because for me, I am teaching. It's hard because in Swedish it's easier. You can play with the words in a way that's hard in English. But as long as I'm in contact with students, I am teaching because I'm trying to achieve something with them. I am not just a private person being with them. I am a teacher, and then I am teaching. That doesn't mean that I have to tell them things. I can also be teaching just with my interaction with the students, but me constantly being aware of what I'm doing. And to understand this, you can then use didactics. And didactics is understood as the study of the art of teaching, and it involves a learning interaction that should always be intentional. And the word intentional is really, really important. Intention is central to the continental didactic tradition, and that you have an intention, you want something with the specific teaching situation. And it's evaluable also. You can then say, did I reach that or did I not reach that intention. And it's based on the questions of why, what, and how, and it's also often described as either general didactics or subject didactics. And the general didactics is connected to the continental tradition, mostly the German tradition, and the subject didactics is mostly connected to the more Anglo-American tradition. And I would say then that it gives, and this is also what Korsgaard and Mortensen says, that the teacher's work with students is or should always be purpose-driven, with intention, and carried out with an awareness that its intention has an impact on the outcomes related to inclusion. So as long as you're teaching, you should have inclusion as a didactic intention, and then teaching can be the choice to say hi or not. That is, as I see it, a didactic choice of teaching that can contribute to inclusion. And then it's also important to understand Bildung, because Bildung is the idea that it's a German concept that emphasizes the personal formation through knowledge, self-determination, self-cultivation, and critical reflection, and social responsibility. And I think this is interesting because it's not, then it interconnects as a more holistic idea of what education can be, not just learning a subject, but it's like education is forming a human being in all senses. And in this tradition, didactic is not concerned with just transmission of knowledge from society to learner, as it could be in the more Anglo-American curriculum-driven tradition or teaching models, or it's not, nor with the simplified transfer of disciplinary content into a classroom teaching. It's rather regarded knowledge. Then in the Bildung tradition, knowledge is understood as a transformative medium, so that the knowledge is something that helps the student more and more become him or herself in a society. And so the goal is not a fixed outcome or something directly taught, but an educational ideal aimed at activating the human potential. So this is the tradition in which I understand didactics and teaching. I think I'll skip this, but I just say I'm saying didactics with a K because didactic in the English sense sometimes indicates a more connotation of like overly instructive or simplistic teaching. Don't be so didactic can be like don't be so instructive. When I say didactic with a K, I am more referring to the continental tradition of this Bildung, idea of Bildung. So this is a word that I made up, didactics with a K. So in sum, this didactic tradition does not offer ready-made models or evidence-based guidelines for how teachers should think and act. The focus is rather, the most important question in this didactic tradition is why? Like, what is the purpose? And then you have to adapt the how and the where and the what to that why, and the why is constantly guiding you. That is the constant intention, and then you can be flexible in your didactic creativity, I would say. And in this I am very inspired by Wolfgang Klafki, that has really it's talking about the didactic analysis that I think can be combined with the idea of inclusive education. And Klafki, he defines didactics through, and I think this is interesting, two key aspects. It's one aspect is aim and content of teaching, and the other is the nature as social interaction. So this perspective can contribute to an understanding of inclusion as a didactic issue. So in sum, I think continental didactics can make visible and conceptualize the various, often implicit, didactic considerations and constant activities that underpin inclusive teaching in the everyday work. I think there are a lot of potential in discussing it in this way. So that's theoretical. And now coming to the results of my study, and I see that the clock is ticking, so I will see how much I can present. I have a lot of quotes, so we'll see how many quotes I can give you. So this is the model that I have developed in my thesis, and I call it Interwoven Inclusive Teaching. And it's consisted of what I call didactic persona, didactic alliance and didactic action. It's important that they are all interwoven because they are all needed for the students, like, because the students describe that these are all needed in a way for them to experience inclusion, or like what they described as anti-discrimination, or yeah, they are. I haven't asked them about what is inclusion for you. I am asking, like, what is discrimination? What is the opposite for you, and how does teachers contribute to that? And it's important here because I think often inclusion is often connected to what I hear described as action. It's like you should think about like how the physical environment, the methods, how you place the students. And of course that is important, but I would say that it's also really important how the didactic persona presents itself and how the didactic alliance is established between the student and the teacher. And this is all based then on the student's perspectives, is important to understand. So this comes from the students' descriptions of what they experience as teachers doing inclusion or not discrimination. And I just want to say that this is because this is what the students produce. So this is a collage that, and this is in Swedish, obviously, but it was interesting because I created this model in my analysis, and then I found this in my material. I was like, oh my God, it's just this, because these are the dimensions, and I found it afterwards. So it was just really interesting to see a student have written have created this image that describes these 3 dimensions. And I will not read it in Swedish. You have to believe me on this. If I should just say something about the didactic persona, I just first need to say something about the word persona. It's a Latin word meaning personality, person, role, and mask. And in Swedish, it's explained as the personality that someone chooses to show to the outside world. And so I can say that it's a question of both a professional role and mask, like the teacher, and the personality who fills that role. So it's a matter of choice, like how within the role, what do I present myself with, what I don't present myself with. If you are familiar with Irving Goffman, I am inspired by his idea of the social life and masks, but not mask as covering yourself, but presenting yourself in different ways. And I would say, like, a teacher who can navigate this and put yourself forward in a conscious way contributes to inclusion, is described by the students in that way. And the teachers who can handle this duality of persona, like me and the role, in the didactically conscious way, can be understood as the students say, teacher humans. They also, like, a person who does not come forward as a human being is a robot. And in 3 different schools, this is interesting, 3 different schools, students use exactly the same words. Excluding teachers are teacher robots. And one student says that if the teacher is a human being, then I can also be a human being. So it's the being human within the teacher role is over and over described by the students as important for their experience of inclusion. So in some, I have a huge material and so much more other descriptions, but in some, so this is a student drawing an inclusive teacher who is showing him or herself and is beaming, the student said. The inclusive teacher is beaming. And such a teacher share himself or herself with, like, talks about his or her family in a conscious way. It's a lot of talk about body and how to open up the body with gestures, positions, but they talk also a lot about the gaze and the voice, how that opens up. It's important, they say, that an inclusive teacher contributes with joy and humor, reflects and can take critique, but it's also important to show commitment to the teaching. Like, if the teacher is committed to the subject, then it opens up a world where we can be together in mathematics, for example. So, but then the teacher needs to be engaged and wants to be us to be engaged. Yeah. Time. So just this student says that you learn by example. As humans, we generally learn from the example set by others. We observe what others demonstrate and readily imitate them as we attempt to discover ourselves. I read about this and laughter. Therefore, if a teacher begins to treat you poorly and does not respect you as an individual, it's easy to imitate that behavior because that's what happens. It's human behavior. And then another student says, it's something I don't like. I feel like I become a different person when I'm in a classroom where I don't feel that the teacher is inclusive. I don't like how I become because I become like this, not the bad version of myself, but I feel that this is not good. So I start to feel uncomfortable. You know what I mean? I'm convinced that the different people bring out different versions of you. I really believe that it's true with teachers too. If they're offensive, then you'll trigger students and bring out the worst in them. But if you are like this, then the really nice sides come out, and you might be surprised at what some students will dare to tell you and feel comfortable with. So yes. And then I say, so what you give is what you get. Yes, reach, says the student. And this is a postcard that the student chose to show an inclusive teacher that comes forward as a person. But then it's important here. They are very, very, very clear on that. This is important that to be inclusive, the teacher has to be personal and not private. So, and I would say a way to define that is that if you come forward as a person within your teacher role in a didactically conscious way, like if you have a conscious didactic intention, then you can calibrate what to come forward with and not. And then you can balance that border, like the limit on, so that, because it can be like if you're completely person, then you start discriminating, you know, because if you don't have to be, as the student says, you have to have a connection with a distance. And then you become a teacher person who is personal. But if you are a teacher just reveals himself without a didactic choice, a conscious didactic purpose, then you become a person who is private. So I think they want a teacher human or a teacher person to feel included. I need to wrap this up, so I'm going to do that. If you come to Didactic Alliance, this is quite related to what in an international context is called relational pedagogy. Bingham and Sid Harkin have written this book, No Education Without Relation. And I think I see a lot of that in this context, also connected to research on participation and influence and all these things. So it's not really new, but what I see is that they are not talking about any relation. They are talking about a relation in an educational setting. And that is why I've chosen this word, didactic alliance. So alliance comes from Freud and the therapeutic alliance. It's an agreement, a contract, and like Freud talks about the therapeutic agreement. But I would say I'm talking about the didactic agreement, the teaching agreement, and then you have a contact within that agreement. It's not any contact. It's a contact that should contribute to this specific agreement. So I wouldn't say that student relationships with teacher-student relationships is therapeutic, but it's a didactic situation. And the interesting thing is the relation that is within that contributes to this didactic relation. And then the students say, then if we have this relation and the teacher sees me as a student person and not just a student, then I feel included. So they also use these words. I want to be a student person. And this is another collage that a student has made. And so this alliance comes forward when the teacher listens and understands, asks open-ended questions and probing questions. So they talk a lot about how teachers ask questions. They can take the student's perspective. They support and believe in students. They act with an awareness of the power that the teacher has. And really important is that they treat equally. They talk a lot about the problem of favoritism and how favoritism is really a problem with this you feel excluded. So they even talk more about the problem with favoritism than with explicit discrimination, I would say. I have to skip this, but this is a student trying to illustrate what the alliance is about. And then if we come to action, then this I think you will recognize, because here we come, because action, I've chosen that word because it originally comes from the Latin word actio, and which is action, agere, to act, work. So it carries an intentional direction, and in didactics is intentional, but it's also, if you in English, the English definition is the process of doing something in order to make something happen. So I think it's all these things that you do with a very conscious intention of how to place the student in the classroom, what content you choose, and so it emphasizes the intentional and focuses in on intervention that teachers consciously do to influence the course of events. And I think here we have a lot of, I recognize a lot of things that is discussed within inclusive education. So the students say that the teacher adapts to students' perspectives, and by giving them influence and adapting invariant teaching methods, and they guide consciously with rules and instructions, placement of students in the classroom, division of students into working groups. Like they talk about a lot about the importance of guidance and clear directions, but not clear directions that holds them stuck, but directions that holds them safe and with an understanding of what is happening. It's very important that they set boundaries by norms that create clarity and security, consciously and explicitly works against violations. They talk a lot about the importance of teachers saying no to discrimination and harassment at once, because they have to establish an inclusive climate at once. And they also talk about the conscious teaching content, like what kind of language you use, concepts you use, the variety in the material, that also you need to talk about anti-discrimination, and they also talk about the ambition to be neutral. And some short conclusions. So I think it's important to understand that these are interwoven together. I'm trying to make a little, they are like moving together. So if the didactic persona is very static, a robot, then it like locks the other dimensions. So if you are a robot, it's harder for you to do inclusive didactic actions, because the persona it's like saying yes, of course we have all these inclusive exercises, and the students are really feeling that it's really stuck. It doesn't really matter for the students. They say what is done if it's static. So I think that is interesting to understand that they are all contributing to each other. And then I also want to end with a concept that I am developing that I call inclusive didactic spatiality. So this is a student drawing an inclusive teacher. Now I will read this quote because I think it's so nice. So the students talk a lot about inclusion as weing. So to make a we. And the student says, what I was thinking about was that when you meet a teacher you like, when you feel included, it's like rays of sunshine. And at the same time, it feels like you're kind of in heaven floating a bit. It feels nice. You like being there. It's bright, it's pleasant. You just like the environment in general. And I think it's a bit the same with the feeling included, like big arms that sort of gather you in. You feel seen, like the teacher really sees everyone, spreading love and inclusion, kind of like that. And then you see everyone, no matter what they look like. That's why there are so many colors. That's what's kind of the idea. And then I say, so it's like kind of an open channel. I was thinking that everyone should be part of this we. And then I say, yeah, right, connected to these arms. And the student says, yes, they gather everyone in. They gather everyone in some kind of center. And whether you're out here, like out here in the outskirts, or in here, everyone gets included. And this is what I try to describe as the inclusive didactic spatiality. So I try to understand it as inclusion can be understood as a flexible, intentional, and relational teaching space. So this is why it's round, that is constantly shaped by the teacher's didactic work. So it's not a room, but it's a rooming. It's something that you do, spatiality. And it's guided by a conscious purpose within this model. It's not a physical space, but a pedagogical condition. I would say that it's a fictive world in the world, that teaching is understood as creating a fictive universe where some other things can appear than out in the real world. And inclusion in this way is not understood as something external or prior to subject teaching, but as something that emerges through it. And this is very much supported by Klafki's ideas. When the content is brought to life by a teacher who, with an inclusive intention, fosters motivation, belonging, and curiosity. And then inclusive didactic spatiality can challenge conventional separations between like upbringing and knowledge, or the social and the instructional. And I think understanding it as a constant process and as a content piece of didactic art, I think we can maybe understand how inclusion is made in like the everyday choices, and maybe put words to it in a way that can like help us understand how we can do it even better. Yeah, I think I'm done there. Thank you.